Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining and sharing your interest in the event. This event, and also along with the other series of events, is hosted by DEMA, Diversity in Medical Academia, that aims to bridge the gap to allow students to know more information in terms of getting into research, or also making sure they have the best steps in mind in terms of any of the research that they have already started into completion. In today's event, I'm very kindly joined by Dr. Logan Manicam, who is a UK board certified public health physician with 13 years of experience in policymaking, academic, and also clinical entrepreneurship. In this event, more specifically, he's going to talk about his academic journey and all of the opportunities that came along the way, the things that he has done, and also quick tips that he can advise to anyone to the point where he's standing right now. Thank you very much again, Dr. Logan. And before we begin, I also want to make sure to tell you as well, we will have a feedback form that will be shared the link for in the chat. Please fill out the feedback form for you to be able to get the attendance certificate. That will be sent out shortly after, in the middle of the event, or also nearer to the end. All over to you, Dr. Manicam.
Thanks, Silent, for the invite. So I'll quickly share my screen. And apologies, I'm going to keep my camera off because my computer battery is acting up a bit, so it probably may not last the entire hour. Without further ado, so I've been told to talk about my academic journey, but I thought it'd be useful to perhaps talk holistically about my entire clinical journey over the past 13 years, and perhaps that sort of can provide an insight into some of the decisions and opportunity costs that you guys will also have to decide over the course of your career. So I'll just sort of summarize my current positions, my key ones, the ones that actually earn an income and the ones that are a bit more passive. So I'm currently an NIHR. So the first one is an NIHR Advanced Fellow at the UCL Institute for Epidemiology and Healthcare. So that's a third-year consultant clinical academic, and I'm funded by NIHR to lead a three-arm cluster randomized control trial called the Nurture Early for Optimal Nutrition, which is sort of women's groups to improve infant feeding, hygiene, and dental practices in children under 2 in South Asian origin, using multilingual facilitators. My interest is in sort of in ethnic minority research. It just so happens to include South Asians, but yeah, that's how I was funded for the study. And that study was awarded the 2021 RSPH Health in Every Age Award. So that was pretty good. So that's my first job. My second current job is an interim consultant in public health and midway council. So that's the service version of what I do. And the scope of my work is health protection, healthcare, public health, and child health. So to give you some context, over the course of 2 years now, not so much now, a lot of my work in Kent and Medway, rather than just Medway, was focusing on closing down COVID outbreaks in care homes, prisons, schools. I was leading the EU exit plans in the 2020 France-UK border closure. I deployed sort of 700 military staff members to set up symptom-free testing to reopen the border. And currently you hear all the issues with Manston and Kent, a variety of outbreaks in diphtheria. I'm leading a lot of the refugee crisis in Kent and Medway. So this sort of some of the service work I actually do practically. And I'm interim because I do it as a long-term consultancy rather than a substantive post, because my first post is the substantive post. And within that, I'm also in Medway Council, also the capacity training and development lead for Medway's 5 million bid to basically set up a research center in local authority. So I've managed to merge my academic interests in local authority interests, and that's with the University of Kent. And then my third job is a local acute medical researcher or registrar at Medway Hospital. So I do that really periodically now. I used to do that quite a lot, so maybe 1 or 2 shifts a month every time I'm back in UK. And it sort of keeps my hand in practice rather than actually making substantive income. So my 2 main incomes for the first 1 and 2. I also sort of own 2 companies. I'm the chair of Assessor Global Health Consultants, which basically is a multi-office consultancy firm, but predominantly at the moment makes most of its money from UK clients. And I'm also chair of Somebody Studios, which is sort of a London-based social enterprise company. that converts children's drawings from communities in East London and Jaipur into clothes, sort of slow fashion with profits reinvested back into charities, and is doing quite well. And both of these positions, I don't actually make money. The first one, actually, I use it sort of to pay my way through midway. The second one actually is just food for the soul. So yeah, just sort of give you context. And I'll give you sort of a whistle-stop tour as to how my 13 years of decisions sort of led me to where I am now. I think I'll start off with research because research is perhaps the thing you're most interested in. And feel free to either ask questions now or later. Actually, all those things said that I can't see any hands raised. I don't know. Let me know if you see any hands raised because I'm presenting. So I started off as a research assistant in Leicester Royal Infirmary Children's CD. So I was a medical student between 2004 to 2005 in Leicester Medical School. And obviously, I heard a lot of people talking about research as a way to improve your CV. It's very competitive. And I saw an advert placed, to do an out-of-hours project on emergency admissions. So that was paid. And to be fair, a lot of that work was sort of grueling, sort of evenings and weekends doing questionnaires. But, by sort of showing enthusiasm, I was given the opportunity to publish a paper on ED presentations. Now, that sort of really fostered a very good long-term relationship with the PI of that study, Monica Luckenpohl, who continued to provide me research projects, but of course, all of them were unfunded. So I started to do papers along the side of my medical school, and that sort of slowly improved my CV. But I actually, to be honest, wasn't really serious at doing it at all up until I sort of had my first failure. So my first failure was the sort of the 2009 to 2014 bit. So I obviously applied for, in the UK, what you call an academic foundation program. In the States, I think the sort of integrated training in other countries is pretty similar, where you merge clinical and academic training together. And I got jobs in Stoke and Wolverhampton. But the only reason why I got those jobs was because no one else applied for it. The location was so unpopular. Stoke and Wolverhampton isn't, known for, lively towns. I was the only one applied, and therefore I got it. So everything else I applied for, I was unsuccessful. And that was because at the time I really only had one abstract, which was from that, children's ED project, and a poster. And I was feeling smug for myself, but actually lots of people had 5, 10 publications, so obviously I couldn't compete. And that was sort of that moment really when I decided actually I really need to invest in my career and started to really, really work hard in the F1 and F2 years, residencies in the States, and really sort of effectively had no life. I started to turn around my CV, but still not fast enough because it was only 15 months before the next stage of applications, which is sort of the fellowships in the States or the ACF. And I then applied for the Paediatrics ACF all around the country, not just London. And I was lucky to get the one in Imperial. Although bear in mind, I was initially rejected, and I got into a reserve spot. So 6 months later, after somebody sort of left that post, I got the spot. Then I did that, and sort of a year into it, I then realized actually I wanted to do public health. To be honest, I wanted to do both pediatrics and public health. So I didn't know anything about public health before that, but I was very interested with the idea of doing stuff at population level. And I also found out that really sort of pediatrics, very fun, in the face of it, but fundamentally it's not sustainable. And in most health systems in the world, doctors are sort of overworked. And actually, if you work something at 100 hours a week, you quickly lose your passion in it. And I wanted to sort of get into something into the service area. So I applied for public health, got into the public health training scheme, and that was also a reserve. But the public health, the School of Pediatrics refused to allow my application to dual train. So I had to decide between pediatrics and public health, if that makes sense. I couldn't do both. So I had to pick one or the other, and I chose public health because obviously I had to forecast what I thought my future life could look like. Mind you, at the same time, I was actually contemplating an MBA. So I actually did apply for London Business School MBA, which I did get. But because I got the public health training scheme, I decided to go for that because they paid for a free master's and the LBS I had to pay. So that's when I sort of moved really from a foundation program to ACFs in pediatrics and set myself onto the public health training scheme. And lots of that is characterized by rejections and failures in a variety of applications. And that's really a recurrent feature of any academic training pathway is that you have to be prepared for lots of rejections along the way from this junior to senior level. Alongside the training program, so the actual job, I then did stuff on the side for free. So, doing free stuff never actually ends, even now, to be honest. So I did a nice scholar project 1 day a week, and I've put the link there for people to sort of look at how that looks like. They actually accept medical students as well, or healthcare professionals. And then really in 2014, 17, I did my first, my actual PhD. So there was sort of the NIHR scheme, and that funds you to do 3 years fully funded fellowship at 36K per year. So that's the smart way to do a PhD. Most people who do PhDs on 20K a year, they're not doing the smart thing to do. Of course, with that, lots of rejections before that to get the MRC and Wellcome Trust. So I didn't even know whether I would get the NIHR one. And I was lucky. I was the reserve list, and again, I was successful. If I didn't do that, if I didn't get that, I probably would have had to do a studentship. But I was able to get away without doing that. Although, to be fair, if I didn't get a fellowship, I probably wouldn't have done a PhD because it just wouldn't be worth my time. And then during that time, I was, because my doctoral fellowship was very flexible, because I had my own funding, I took some time out to go to the States and spend about a month or so, and I was a clinical research fellow at Columbia, so sort of free things to do things. Once I finished my PhD, I then was awarded the academic clinical lectureship, and I was very lucky. I was 1 in 2, and I split my time 50-50 between, no, not 50-50. So 50% at UCL and Chatham House, and the other 50% at Southern Council, which I explained for about 2 years. I then continued to apply for my next fellowships. So I tried for MRC, Wellcome Trust, UKRI, and I was unsuccessful. And so sort of I had a good 6 months essentially of a career break where I didn't have any academic funding, so had effectively no job. But I was successful to get a next fellowship, or the postdoctoral one, between 2020 to 23. And then now in my Medway role, I'm also funded to do the NIHR Medway HDRC. And I've just applied for another fellowship at UCL, which will continue my job if I'm successful from May 2023. If I'm unsuccessful, then I will have no academic job at UCL. So, so the long and short answer is that academia can be very interesting. It allows a lot of very interesting opportunities. It does fast track your CV in very interesting places, and you can have sort of a more flexible or very job portfolio, but you don't do it for work-life balance generally. It does lead itself to lots of thankless hours and unpaid sacrifice. And generally speaking, the pyramid is very, very steep. Not everyone goes all the way to a postdoctoral fellowship. Most people stick around that first tier of the pyramid, and then some do PhDs, but quite a few didn't sort of drop off. And I think it's worthwhile recognizing that. What I didn't describe in this diagram is another project I was successful to get 2 years of funding to do a project in India, which sort of really fostered my global health interests. An MRC funded project to improve infant feeding in 2018. But again, that's sort of littered with many failed grant applications. So you have to accept the severity of that. So that's sort of research in a nutshell, my research career. And I think I guess this is sort of and this is not my diagram, but this is in a UCL, early career research author experience workshop on publications. There's a lot of things to do to go through a publication process, from, the discovery of content, doing the research, finding a journal, prep the article submission, editorial review and publication. There's tons and tons of steps. And, in my earlier parts of my career, I used to work with lots of medical students directly because obviously I needed free labor. And quid pro quo, I would give people co-authorship in exchange, also helping me in going through this process. But the attrition rate is very high. On average, I mean, most of my CV, in 62 publications I have, maybe over 50 has a medical student or 2 or 3 with that, or even an allied health professional. But generally speaking, about 90% of students drop off because you need an incredible amount of resilience, and the average time from a publication or start of a project to publication is between 3 months to 2 years. So people generally has to be pretty well invested to do that. We always give publications, people or co-authorship, people stay all the way, but many don't stick around for that reason. Or if they do, they'll do 1 or 2 just to get enough to get into a London job or a central, just to make the CV stand out a bit, but not want to continue to commit their time. And I think if you're really interested in medical research, you have to understand there's some sacrifices to be made, which doesn't actually translate to money. It's sort of more for freedom, other stuff in life, rather, and opportunities to do academic jobs rather than actual money, if that makes sense. And I think this is sort of a streamlined approach towards that in a slightly less messy way. But once you do 1 to 4, what then happens is that 5 to 6 is effectively stuck in a vicious, endless cycle where you try to find a journal that wants your paper, and you keep changing it based on editorial and peer review. And that's the bit that generally tends to take a lot of time. And I've had papers, almost taken 4 years, one of the worst ones. It does get published, I know what can and can't get published, but there's a huge amount of willpower. Generally, it's not that long, but you have to accept that. And sometimes they all come together. We get a couple of years ago, I had like 5 in one go accepted. So some just don't really know. So I think it's worthwhile considering that this is kind of a very cyclical but difficult, arduous journey. Interesting. I've done lots of. I don't regret it in that sense, because it gives me opportunities to do conferences and interesting places and doing stuff, and also it expands your consultancy, but it comes with sacrifice. So my clinical work, which I kind of touched on a bit anyway. So obviously I was in the foundation program in Stoke and Wolverhampton, 2009-11. And then I did pediatrics for a year in the Royal Free Hospital, and then swapped around to public health in 2012, 2014. And that's when I continued to do clinical work as a locum doctor, because I was still interested in clinical work. I just couldn't do that together in parallel, if that makes sense. In my doctoral fellowship, when I was out of program, I was still continuing clinical work. And then again, I mentioned my UCL, ACEL, in UCL and Southern Council. My other half was in Southern Council for a year. A clinical break sort of focused on other things, basically being a dad. Became an interim public health consultant in Kent and Medway, and sort of continued that from 2022 to current. And now I just focus on just acute medicine in Medway. I used to do pediatrics quite a lot, but it's too difficult to do it if you're doing 1 or 2 days a month. You have to sort of be quite well skilled. So you have to accept, there's choices that has to be made to get everything, to get some things, and you can't physically do everything. Well, you can if you have no life, but most people want to have a life at my age. And then steps towards research. So I think, and I think it's called steps towards research, but this is probably my other stuff, if that makes sense. So there are lots of things I picked up along the way that was not clinical and not research. It sort of fits into the line of entrepreneurship and social enterprises. So consultancy on its own does not lead to academia, because those things never get published in academic journals. So if you do this work, it doesn't actually really classify as you having an academic career, but it does show that you're a good implementer of evidence. So I was involved to do UCL Partners Discrete Assignment 2015, then took on a sort of more substantive interim role in Children's Public Health Lead for £400 per day for 3 days a week. It was very nice. I did an internship at UNICEF, Maternal Newborn Health, which doesn't do any research whatsoever, but very interesting to actually, but they do a lot of reading of research to apply and write out plans. At that point, I sort of rebranded my consultancy firm to Assasso, and it really expanded that. So the CHIP Consortium, sort of a very comprehensive global consortium to improve reduce infections in children in urban slums. Continue to expand Assasso and CHIP, and then from the side of that, launch Somebody Studios with sort of links with community engagement. And really the idea came from another fashion enterprise that converted children's drawings into clothes in East London for £2,000 a piece. But sort of over the last years becoming very difficult to maintain everything, and therefore I decided to resign from CHIP and step back from Assasso. And these are other things, other stuff in life that is beyond the traditional academic career, but adds flavor into my life. Now I think this is a bit condensed, but I think Adan, you've already sent this, but in essence, obviously, I think the biggest thing that I realized when I was young was perhaps not having the opportunities or not knowing where the opportunities are, or what is research, what's audit. And so what I've done is sort of provide a list of opportunities on publications, and we currently have about 20 projects, which you sort of halfway done, which you can get involved at any one stage. I can't guarantee how long it will take, but they will all lead to publication. So that's something you can do. But if you're interested in the other stuff, the consultancy, which I've sort of listed out there, you can link out to Makai Paris, and that can be paid. And similarly, obviously, I'm expanding a lot of my work in Medway Council to also include research. So if you're interested in that, sort of let Umi Bella know. And that's my 2 cents of research in academia and pediatrics. And I'm happy to take questions anywhere throughout the journey. I'll keep the slides up in case you want me to go back to them.